Reed Richards gets his comeuppance.
What do you do when server's coming? Got to call Galactus, got to call Galactus. Read your comics!
Thanks for joining me. My name is Daryl, and I am the host of Read Your Comics. Over the last few months, I have been doing a FF video as we build up to the MCU Fantastic Four First Steps coming out, and it should be out today when this video drops. And I have my tickets to go see it later this evening. But if you want to watch any of those previous videos, I have a playlist right there. Be sure to check that out. And if you're new to the channel or just haven't done so already, be sure to hit subscribe so you don't miss any future videos. As I was saying, I've been doing these FF videos. I'm going to be taking a break from FF for a little while, but that doesn't mean I won't get back to them eventually. This 5-day run of FF has been heavily focused on Galactus, and that is what I'm going to wrap up with the trial of Reed Richards. In my previous episode, we showed Galactus devouring the Skrull homeworld. That took place after Reed had saved Galactus about 12 issues earlier or so. And at the end of that last one, we saw Reed at Avengers Mansion, and Scarlet Witch had gone to make him some tea, and there was a scream, and she came back to a big hole in the wall, and Reed was missing. So about 4 issues go by, and we find out what happened to Reed. He had been abducted by the Shi'ar and put on trial for saving Galactus, and then he devoured an inhabited planet, which happened to be the Skrull homeworld. So I really love this cover. I love the red, makes it pop off the shelf. I like how Reed is isolated in the middle in chains. The cover itself tells a good story. And then you've got quite a bit of intricate detail in all the faces in the background. You know, Byrne could have just done like a few faces, but he decided to really pack it in to show that these are all the survivors of worlds Galactus has devoured over the centuries, I suppose. And here they are coming together to put the man who saved Galactus on trial. Now, something interesting, the High Evolutionary saved Galactus at one point too. We looked at those issues in the middle of the week. He was never put on trial for that. Regardless, though, every 10 years, you kind of have to almost ignore some stuff to tell an interesting story. I think John Byrne tells a much more interesting story than Roy Thomas did anyway. So let's dive in. I'll have one more thing. The call out to the Assistant Editors Month. I'm sure John Byrne just had this on his own personal schedule to get to this issue, and it happened to coincide with this Assistant Editors Month. A lot of the covers that month had something like goofy going on, and John Byrne pleading not to do something silly on his cover this month. But we get a little silliness in the beginning. We're actually going to see John Byrne injected into the story. We have Marvel editor Mike Higgins in discussion with John Byrne about how to handle this issue. And they're playing it up in much the same way that Stan and Jack infused themselves into some early issues, where they were writing the stories for comics in the Marvel Universe. And they had to run the stories by the FF and give them the ideas of how they were going to present it in the comics. So, and it's also an interesting way to say who is doing what in all this dialogue. He mentions Jim Novak doing the lettering, Glennis Ween doing the coloring, and that Jim Shooter's the editor-in-chief and his own name as well. And John is saying that he's been trying to get in touch with the Fantastic Four and ask them what the next story is, but they've been on an adventure of some sort, and he hasn't been able to get in touch with them, and that they're very particularly the Thing, about what he puts in the comic. So the deadline's coming up, and he's saying, if I can't get in touch with them, I'll go ahead and make something up. So here he is calling the FF headquarters. She's saying that, and their robot receptionist, who the top torso looks like a person, is saying that they're not there. I was reading this with my kids, and we were laughing, and I was saying this is like a Disney animatronic, more or less, but has more AI sentience to be able to answer questions and stuff. And as he gets off the phone, he's approached by the Watcher. This is a really interesting background Byrne does right here. I wonder how he pulled this off. It almost looks like some kind of collaged photostat of some sort, almost like a fractal. It's interesting the way it's colored too. I think in the last issue, I was looking at a True Believers version, which is, recolored on brighter paper. And I was kind of critical of when John Byrne inks himself. And I still maintain that thought, but maybe it's the paper. This newsprint paper soaks it up a little better. That even though he's inking himself in this, it still looks more clearly defined than it does when it's printed on the high gloss paper. So the Watcher is going to whisk John Byrne away to witness this trial, and John Byrne's wife gets a cameo in the process. Even this looks like kind of a photostat collage of some sort. This looks like a root system, like took a picture of some kind of plants and then just, overexposed it to get that effect. Love 80s ads. They really take me back. And a nice double page spread. Byrne did this in the last issue with Galactus looking out over a galaxy of some sort. But here we've got a Shi'ar courtroom. A little different than what we saw with the Phoenix just a few years before this, but a similar layout nonetheless. And take note of all these colored orbs or discs up here, whatever they are. And in the last issue, the other three members had found Reed. They'd been on an adventure to get him, and here they are to bear witness to the trial themselves. And the Watcher drops John Byrne off, and you even have all the characters kind of reacting to his appearance, like, what the heck are you doing here, Byrne? Maybe he's come to try and get the story right this time. It's kind of funny. It's a humorous aspect there. And the FF kind of get him up to speed and mention how like Lalandra had come and visited the FF in issues 251. I'm unclear if she visited him during this 251 to 256 numbering. That was also when they were doing a Negative Zone storyline. And you get Sue and Reed getting it on right here when Lalandra interrupts them. Or this X-Men 167. I'm sure if you were like a big fan of Byrne's X-Men coming out at this time, and then for him to use these Shi'ar elements, kind of connecting them to that corner of X-Men that wasn't really explored by other books at the time. The Shi'ar, like the Shi'ar and the Avengers or Spider-Man or anything, were interacting very often or at all. So it was kind of neat to see him interacting here with the Fantastic Four. And it would make sense that the Fantastic Four would kind of learn about him somehow, because the Fantastic Four obviously engage with some more outer space creatures. The Avengers too, I guess, interacts with the Kree a lot. That's like the big three: the Kree, the Shi'ar, and the Skrulls. It's funny how Byrne kind of throws shade at Lalandra and calls her an arrogant witch that's gotten too big for herself, as she's now the magistry of the Shi'ar. Next, we find out how the court is going to work, and these orbs up here, they're colored. And as witnesses are presented and plead their case against Richards, if anyone in this massive audience feels that he's guilty and there's no turning back, I guess, they'll turn white. So if they all turn white, he's 100% guilty, and then they don't even really say what the judgment's going to be, but it doesn't sound good, right? So the first witness is a Skrull who then explains the whole part with Galactus that happened a few issues ago that I did a video on just before this. And you get that whole recap. I like how Byrne makes him sink down into the planet to absorb it, more so than what we saw in the video I did on issue 175, where he takes on the High Evolutionary and then he absorbs the pop-up planet of the Impossible Man. And in that one, he was just absorbing like straight energy. It was just energy kind of going into him, generic looking in some ways. But in this, it's like he's reducing the planet to like magma, and he sinks down into it. Now, it's a more visual representation of how a being like this would end the life of a planet. More good visuals of the planet kind of coming apart and, more or less exploding. I like this scroll. I would criticize Byrne in that last issue I looked at. It says Skrull's looking a little too human with a bumpy chin and pointy ears, but this looks more like the This looks more like a original Kirby-ish scroll. So I do like that. And Reed is, contemplating his role in all this. He did save Galactus. If he hadn't done it, then the Skrull homeworld wouldn't have been devoured. He does feel the remorse and the responsibility for that, but also he sees that Galactus was a living being himself and he couldn't just let him die. And the Galactus is in many ways bigger than, and the Galactus in many ways, it's reiterated over and over again, he's a force of nature. He is part of the universe, part of the natural order of the universe. And we kind of get a recreation of that cover. I tried to look and see if this is something that he drew separately and superimposed on the cover as well as here. And I mostly went to this like kind of jellyfish looking creature because I saw it on the cover. It stood out right there. But then you got this big head and Sue's head right there, and they're not on this. So he recreated this same thing twice. And nothing in particular is jumping out at me, but there's been all kinds of alien races throughout the Marvel universe that have appeared in various books. And it would be interesting to sit there and identify all of them that you can in this. Meanwhile, the Watcher is going to grab Johnny to go off and get something again. Very reminiscent of what he did in the first encounter with Galactus. Because the Watcher actually is kind of acting as the defense attorney for Reed Richards in some ways. He's the one calling the witnesses in defense and so forth. So he brings up Reed Richards to defend himself, and Reed says, yes, I'm guilty of saving Galactus's life. Did I do that? Yes, I certainly did do it. But in all this dialogue, and as I said in a couple videos ago, Roy Thomas crammed in narration and dialogue almost just like he was getting paid by the letter. And so sometimes I feel like Byrne gets a little verbose too, but you look at all this and it really does push the story forward. All of this is kind of necessary reading. There's definitely times I read a Stan Lee or a Roy Thomas book, and there's narration boxes I can almost kind of glaze over because they aren't really necessary to pushing the story along. But all of this truly does, particularly this section right here, where he's talking about Galactus as a good or evil being, that the Watcher told him when he first appeared that he was above good and evil. And Reed said that's always bothered him, so that means that he's neutral. But he's clearly not neutral because he is devouring planets inhabited with life, with catastrophic consequences. And how can a being like that truly be neutral? And he uses an Einstein quote to say that, God doesn't just do things on a whim, that everything has a natural order and place, and Galactus does fall into that. Here's another one of these like photostat collages. I'd like to know what he used in this. In a Kirby collage, you can often see specific items that are in there, but this just looks like textures and stuff that he used. Just then, Johnny returns with the witness that the Watcher sent him to get, and it's none other than Odin. And you want to talk about epic scale of putting Reed Richards on trial. His first defense witness is the king of Asgard. Talk about stakes, right? Even Byrne himself is just blown away. And everybody else is too, because even though they've encountered Thor so many times, they've never encountered Odin. They've never directly dealt with Odin. For all they knew, Thor was just some metahuman that claimed to be the god of thunder. They really had no real evidence of his claims to be the god of thunder and wrapped into the real Norse mythology. But Odin is going to recount the origin of Galactus, which was a story originally told in Thor. He's saying Thor told this to him, so that's his firsthand knowledge of it. And he tells the story of a scientist from a dying universe named Galen from the planet Ta, and how that universe died, and Galen was able to kind of travel through the dying universe, and he came out on the other side as Galactus. And you just basically get it all retold to you right here. And it's an interesting way to read it. There's a reprint out there of condensing the Thor parts of the origin. There's a reprint out there. It's a one-shot of Galactus's origin. that just tells that story from Thor in it. But this sums it up too. So if you're looking for like a nice, concise origin of Galactus, this does a very good job of it in itself. It shows him passing through the dying universe into the new universe. And he's in like a stasis chamber. And when it emerges, he is Galactus. And then Odin gives like the sweeping finality as if he's the one running the court. And that's all there is to it. He's a force of nature, and there's nothing you or anyone can say about it. Let this court end. The FF and the other 3 members are thinking, that's it. Case closed. Reed won. But Byrne sees, just a minute, gang. It's not quite over yet. Or because more of these orbs have turned white. And she points to it that it is almost over, but not in the favor they think, when this blast comes out and it's the new Herald Nova, the one who led Galactus to the Skrull homeworld, Johnny Storm's ex-girlfriend, who is now a celestial being herself. So, some good emotion on a flaming torch's face right there. He didn't power off for this scene. Sue with that 80s hair. It's rough to look at. And before we even get to this awesome montage page over here, this silhouette with Nova flying in front, it's simplistic and perfect at the same time. Like, just isolate that and you know exactly what's going on. But yeah, this splash page over here, this is Byrne leaning into some of those Kirby splash pages that we've looked at throughout the series of videos I've done this week. Very reminiscent of it, adding the different faces to the different survivors of the planets. Kind of reminds me of that Superman Muhammad Ali book and all the aliens that were there to witness that. Even this one looks like that fried egg alien that I pointed out in the video of that one with Scheme Richards. And as Galactus approaches the court, you see one survivor here who's been waiting for his opportunity, for his chance to run across Galactus again to seek his revenge. And he used everything he's had to come up with this weapon that he thinks will take out Galactus. And he overthinks it, this whole scenario right here, until he thinks, what if it doesn't work? He turns and sees me and retaliates. And so he shrinks off before he even gets his shot, which is really meant to show you the presence of Galactus is so imposing that here is this former survivor that's probably thought of nothing but revenge on Galactus and how to avenge his planet all of this time. And yet, presented with the moment in the presence of Galactus, he shrinks away. Not because he's a coward, necessarily. It's just, he knows, really deep down, he knows that this is not going to have an effect on a being like this. And now Galactus states his case for Reed Richards. He talks about how Reed saved him. And in those previous encounters with Galactus, like in the Kirby issues, the Roy Thomas issues, Galactus kind of dismissed Reed Richards as just like an earthling that's kind of a nuisance. But ever since he saved him, he has a more profound respect for Reed Richards and even calls him friend. So kind of a big moment for this antagonist character, which they've always presented as a force of nature. But now he is speaking of Reed Richards almost on an equal level. But as Lalandra points out, for Galactus to call Reed a friend, that doesn't really help his case. That's a lot more damning, actually. So the Watcher and Galactus have one more result to summon an entity greater than all. Eternity. So we've seen Odin, the Watcher, Galactus, and now Eternity. Again, this is like the highest of stakes courtroom. This is bigger than the trial of Jean Grey and the Dark Phoenix. All of these celestial beings that govern the Marvel Universe are all getting in on this. And another great montage right here of all the faces as Eternity essentially connects everyone together, and they all get a great understanding of the universe and how everything works, how it's all interwoven with each other. And you see that photo stat collage too, the way he is using it to blend out of Eternity into this page as well. This is really one of John Byrne's best issues, and not a single punch or is thrown. And other than Johnny flaming on, really not any powers being used. You don't see Reed stretching. You don't see Sue turning invisible or force fields. It's a lot of talking. But that pretty much ends the case. Reed is essentially found not guilty. John Byrne has his story to go right, and he's telling the editor, who's like, I don't know, this sounds a little kooky with it. Like Odin and eternity? What? Like, this sounds just too far-fetched. And the Watcher shows up and says, you better get it down on paper quick, because it's going to fade from your mind over time. And Byrne says, why? Why would it fade? And as the Watcher explains, knowing the ultimate truth isn't really meant for humans or many of these alien minds to comprehend and hold on to for their life. It was just a moment to show Galactus's place and kind of help all these survivors, kind of in a way give them closure onto Galactus's place within the universe and why Galactus must carry on the way he does. And that's kind of what Byrne asks. He's like, well, is Galactus going to continue devouring planets in the same way he was, even if they're inhabited? And the Watcher's kind of like, yeah, and that's just kind of how it has to be for the order of the universe to continue as it should. So, really solid issue here. Definitely one of Byrne's more philosophical stories. Really solid stakes for such an event, and kind of encapsulates what is so great about John Byrne's FF run, which would go on for about another 30 issues. So 3 more years after it, but this is kind of the high point, in my opinion. It's all pretty good, but definitely the peak era, I believe. That's all I got for this one. Hope you enjoyed this series of FF videos. Hope that the movie's good. I'll find out later this evening myself. Until then, read your comics.